And now, it's the moment you've all been waiting for. Show the Tyromancy Drunken. And we will show it right now. Here we go. There we go. It's showing. So professional, isn't it? So professional. Oh my God, I'm so good. I just like switch these things like a pro. Even with my arm coming across there. But hey, that's what you do. I'm still here, by the way. I'm just like moving around. Oh, hello everyone. Hello. It is, what is it? It's Sunday. It's probably after midday by now. I did, what is that now? 2 very long takes, a medium take, and a short one in which the only word that came out of my mouth was shit. It's like, after all the struggles with the equipment and learning software and trying to get everything to work right and getting the best audio, and my voice starting to go as well just from all the countless takes, and like, I mean, I've spoken for hours and hours and hours, which most days I'm not doing. Typing for hours maybe, but not talking for hours. And anyway, yeah, so I don't know why I seem to be getting distracted today. I seem to be a bit sort of, I don't know, unfocused or something, but I kept on getting myself onto tangents, and I would go way down these tangents and so far off topic. And in the end, I'd be looking at myself just going like, what are you even talking about anymore? You don't even know. What's your audience going to think? So anyway, here's another attempt, and I'm going to try and keep this to nice and simple, okay? So first things first, prior to going on to these, I've got some documents in front of me which are my guide for what, now mind you as well. So the articles that I publish in text, most definitely on Substack, most likely also on Locals, what I write prior to recording a video, because I want to have at least something in my head before I go. But as you can see, I'm just kind of ad-libbing, right? I've kind of got a guide, because I don't want to bore you by reading a script. The only time that I would do that is if later on I get all the support that I need to improve my equipment and my setup and get other people to help me and so forth, and we can all support ourselves doing this. Then I would love to do, like, you know, sketch comedy, music, all sorts of other things, you know. But at the moment, I just haven't got anywhere near what I need for that kind of a setup. And also just like, I wouldn't even attempt that until like all the basic skills I've kind of, you know, mastered them and I can do it more fluently. Although that's always going to be restricted in this space by the fact that I'm just kind of crammed into the corner of my room. And literally, like, this gives you an insight into my life. Almost everything that I own in this world is in this one room, right? Almost everything. I have a handful of things outside of this room, and everything else is here. So if you want to know whether or not I need your support, yeah, I do. But anyway, enough about me and my sorry tale. But please give generously if you can. Right. So the thing that I wanted to say before this document. See, I'm getting tangent again, but I will try. Okay, so the thing that I wanted to say was, first of all, thank you very much for all the other people who do various audio and audio-visual podcasts and whatever else you want to call them. Partly because you guys are the inspiration for me to finally do my own thing. Partly because you help me by providing a resource of knowing the kinds of things that people like to watch and what they will contribute towards. Also, because you guys are all established, I can see from your content not only what is sort of, you know, current in terms of the things people are talking about and thinking about, but also in terms of the things that people are missing. And I think that that's one of the things that I would like to contribute towards the whole space of social commentary and satire and everything else, is to be able to fill in the blanks, and also, you know, correct the record in some places. You know, I'm sort of like, I love kind of doing that editing job of like, where, okay, all this body of work's out there, now let me give you like alternative 3. And I think I have a pretty unique perspective on that as well. So hopefully people will find that valuable and will enjoy listening to it. But anyway, so I wanted to thank Anya and Scott Ritter for the interview that they did, because that did provide me like a great inspiration to comment upon. So thank you for being there doing your work, because that provided me inspiration for something of mine. Thank you to the guy from Defense Politics Asia. Sorry, I don't know your name, but and I know you're probably none of you are probably listening to this. I've probably still got an audience of 0, but like, thank you anyway, mate, because when you did the video the other day about the world needing more penises, because I had noticed how when you're covering the war that the lines on the maps that you're drawing did tend to look like penises. And I know, yes, it's my fault. I'm not blaming you. It's my own dirty mind. I'm seeing what's not really there. It was a great explanation by you. It was great to see you standing up as well and basically saying to somebody who was trying to control your show on the basis they donate money to it. It's like, no, you donate money because you want to support my work. If you don't want to support my work, then fine, I'll give you your money back. This is not about, if you want to do your own show, do your own show. But I'm asking you to support me doing my show my way, the way I like to do it. Now, I can imagine that person was probably a little bit conservative and they got offended by the idea of dicks on maps, and they say, you're trivializing the war. It's like, no, he's not trivializing the war. He's not trivializing people dying. What he's doing is he's trying to lighten a heavy subject, a depressing subject, because people are dying, And it wasn't the main focus of what he was doing. The main focus of what he's doing is a lot of research to show you what's going on. And Jesus, doing something this simple is hard enough. I can't imagine, he must have spent a hell of a lot more money than I did, on equipment to get such a slick presentation and to be able to work with all that software so fluidly, So just the money alone that he probably spent setting that thing up, it's like, and the effort that he would have had to go to over a long period of time to get so smooth with all the stuff, the graphics that were done, everything takes effort. Now, I'm discovering on my own how difficult it is when you do everything on your own. I have no particular budget. I've got nobody, supporting me or helping out. It's just me learning everything on my own, trying to do everything in the corner of my room, dealing with a million other sort of problems in life. So I just kind of really admired what he did by sort of saying, listen, I appreciate your support. If you want to, and I mean, I'm kind of putting words in his mouth here, but I'm pretty sure this is what he would sort of say, yep, you understand me. It's like, I appreciate your support. I'm totally open to you giving feedback, so long as you understand that you donating money does not dictate what my show will be about. It's my expression, it's my time, it's my effort. I'm asking you to support. If you don't want to support, that's fine. I publish my content, and some people can afford to support and some people not. And I appreciate the support I get. But what I don't appreciate is you telling me what to do. If you think it should be done differently, then you go do it. You do it differently. That's fine. That'd be your business then. This is my business. So it was great to see him, do that, because I'm sure there are probably a lot of people, and maybe some of them for ideological objectives are trying to bully people into only presenting information in the way that they want it presented. And when you accept that, you cease being a journalist. Now, I mean, I don't even think of myself as a journalist asshole. I mean, I'm really not. I'm just a guy. I'm just this guy, But anyway, so thank you to everybody else out there doing great podcasts. I mean, I don't tune into anywhere near enough, but I hope that over the course of what I'm doing, that I might get to meet some of these people, work with them, cover more of their content and comment on it as well, because I do like the idea of sort of interacting with other people in that way. But also, as I said, I really want to get my setup better, and I want to get to the point where everything is running so smoothly that I can take enough time away to write sort of segment material so that I can create a sort of structured show where I come on and talk, but then I introduce a pre-recorded segment, which might be sketch comedy, which might be a feed of a previously recorded interview. It could be anything, but it's just something that I chuck in there and then come back to talking as well before the next segment and the next segment. So that it really is like a show, because one of the things that I do, particularly if you've got a day where it's pissing down rain and you sort of, see, for me, I have injuries. So for me, I used to love walking in the rain, but now with the injuries, it sort of changes the experience somewhat. And also where I'm living, it's not all that really conducive to it, because it's quite hilly, and with the spinal damage and other issues, like, yeah, that's difficult for me. I kind of need like a sort of flat and preferably, a nice place to walk in. There's just sort of nothing here that isn't more like hiking through, virgin wilderness and hacking your way through the forest, unless you're just boringly wandering up and down hilly roads. But again, difficult. Anyways, so thanks to all those guys. I love watching extended content on the TV, and so I hope that what I produce will help other people by giving you something like that to do, whether it just be a rainy day or whether it just be that you've just woken up and you like to watch something before you begin the rest of your day and make a coffee. I hope that my show can become a part of whatever that routine is, however often. And just like Defense Politics Asia guy, Defense Politics Asia. It's like it's partly for my entertainment as well, partly for my catharsis. I'm open to feedback, but this is, my gig. I want to express myself, and I appreciate your support if you can. Anyway, all right. So I'm getting too divergent and off track again, tangent talking, but okay. So the documents that I had written, one inspired by Anya and Scott Ritter interview, the other one then inspired by this article, and then the other one is one that I haven't written yet, but I may introduce concepts into editing these two or editing them together into a single document, which was about like social control and social engineering and brainwashing and propaganda. So essentially these are like one big topic together. Is you have the idea that for people to socially engineer and socially control, right, is a conspiracy. They conspire to control society. So if you don't believe in conspiracies, you're an idiot, you're living in one, right? The very act of social control, the very act of anything that two or more people come together and conspire or plan to do is a conspiracy. It doesn't have to be covert. The whole world is full of conspiracy. Now, if you were to limit the domain of context by defining, the word conspiracy to only refer to just those conspiracies which are malicious in nature and intent, of a nefarious nature, of a covert nature. If you limit the scope to that and you say, well, this is, okay, fine, you're right about the meaning of the word conspiracy, but we're just talking about this one subset, and that is ridiculous. That never happens. Well, then again, you're still an idiot. Of course it bloody does. The most fleeting glance you could ever take at the history of commerce and politics and military stuff would tell you that it's as commonplace as breathing, okay? They teach it. Mike Pompeo, in an interview, on camera, openly saying, we lie, we stole, we cheated. We had entire courses teaching us how to lie, how to steal, right? They did training courses on the subject, for God's sakes. The CIA openly admitted, published documentation from Freedom of Information Act journalist requests that were granted. We want to see the documents. They published the documents. It clearly states that they invented the term conspiracy theorist for the express purpose of hiding conspiracies in plain sight. Because how do you hide a conspiracy to do something unlawful, criminal, bad in every way? How do you hide that when you're doing it, in public and people can openly see it, and there's all sorts of different evidence that it's just going to be impossible to hide every bit of it? Well, what you do is you hide it in plain sight by getting people to accept this idea that nefarious conspiracies, they never happen. Come on, well, maybe a rare sort of thing, but it's an anomaly. It's not systemic. Of course, it's bloody systemic. And conspirators. It's like you think that we're all evil people getting together. It's like, yeah, for a share of any of the global multi-trillion-dollar industries out there, the military industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the food industry, the energy industry, the you name it industry. I mean, they're all global multi-trillion-dollar industries. I think you'd grind up your own grandmother for a decent share of that. I seriously do. So don't tell me that you're saying that, like, come on, we're not all... Yes, you are. It's like, just look around at the consequences of your actions. Forget your narrative about what really happened and why you were really doing it, or blaming it on to somebody else. And like, oh no, it wasn't me, it was them. It's like, no, it was you. It caused this. That was bleeding obvious from before it began, that was going to be the inevitable outcome. So unless you are such an intellectual cripple that your heart struggles to beat because you haven't got enough brain power to get it to beat, unless that's the circumstances, I can't believe that you're so dumb that you didn't know this was going to be the outcome. Now, at the same time, I'm also a big fan of, you've probably heard terms like Occam's razor and the Dunning-Kruger effect, but there's another really good one that I found around the same time as I found the Dunning-Kruger effect, interestingly. It was a thing called Hanlon's razor. And Hanlon's razor is great. It basically just says, never assume malice where stupidity will suffice. And in general, I agree. I do. Yeah, it's like, there's no need. It's kind of like saying, we'll never assume supernatural causes where just human stupidity and vanity and stuff will suffice. It's the same kind of principle, But in this case, and in many cases, stupidity won't suffice. It's not believable. And they have that phrase, plausible deniability, from which I came up with the phrase implausible deniability. I mean, that was, I don't know, maybe 1 to 2 decades ago that I first used that, like in my little social media rants. I thought, oh, that's clever. And I put up there like the phrase implausible deniability, hoping that it would take off and sort of become a thing that people said, that it's implausible deniability. It's like, maybe it was plausible when everybody was brainwashed and stupid and not thinking, but now that people are waking up, they're starting to see how obvious it all is, Anyway, and I am once again diverging to some degree, but at least I'm also staying on topic this time. So conspiracies are out there. To conspire is simply for 2 or more people to get together and plan to do something for some outcome, objective, agenda, whatever. That is conspiring. Okay, even if we limit it to just malicious, nefarious, covert conspiracies, it would still be naive to think they don't exist. You've got countless cases, well documented throughout history, going back hundreds of years, and it is just so obvious when you look at the definition of the word, people coming together to conspire to do things, and then you combine it with the incentivization of power, right? Wealth, control, freedom to do as you please without consequences, because other people and other species, they pay the consequences, I just get the benefits, right? That is why people do conspire for nefarious, malicious intent, and do so covertly, because they know that their agenda would not be accepted publicly. And so they have to hide it to stop people fighting back too early before they're ready to, lay down their plan upon you. And so we have this link between conspiracy and naivety, in the sense that if you don't think people conspire, you are the definition of naive, seriously ignorant and naive, and dare I say stupid, because, come on, it doesn't take much brain power to see through that. Now, this doesn't mean, of course, that stupidity is a permanent condition that you cannot be cured of, but in order to be cured of it, you have to start watching yourself think, watching yourself react, watching yourself speak, watching yourself listen and react, and, you've got to watch your own processes, and until you become an internal observer of yourself, you're not going to see your habits. You're not going to see yourself behaving in ways automatically without thinking. Because therein lies the real problem. Like, where somebody says something, right? You disagree with it. Why do you disagree with it? Because internally, all you did was this. You referenced your existing belief. You didn't even question its validity. And you said, that contradicts this, therefore that's wrong. That is not valid logic. How do you know that wasn't wrong? The thing in your head that you were referencing could have been wrong, but you don't know. Why do you even believe it in the first place? Do you, in fact, actually have a reason? And herein I would ask you a question, some homework for you, in fact, right? It's like, seriously, go ask yourself these questions. Have I ever asked myself these questions before? Did I ever really ask myself why I believe something? Where did that actually come from? Did I get this mannerism, this behavior through my father, through my mother, through my teacher in third grade, whatever? You have to have that analysis of self. It's like when Neo in the Matrix goes into the kitchen of the Oracle when he first meets her, and above the door, know thyself in Latin, right? These are important things in life, and without them, you are just a lamb to the slaughter. Seriously, if you don't have any capacity for this stuff, you don't even know. Now, mind you, that doesn't mean the rest of us necessarily know any better just because we're a bit more awake. But if you don't have any of this thinking going on, then you are definitely just a lamb to the slaughter, right? Just because they haven't taken you to slaughter yet doesn't mean you're not going there, right? One way or the other, they will use you and they will grind you up, right? They don't care. As Scott Ritter said, in his example towards the Polish, they don't care. So, anyways, so conspiracy is commonplace, and we need to, put to death our naivety, put to death our ignorance, put to death our intellectual laziness, our insecurity. I mean, here's another thing too. It's like, why do people not challenge a false belief? And think about it in this way, right? If I believe something which is a falsehood, and especially where I'm emotionally attached to that falsehood, I believe it has to be true, I want it to be true, right? So I have this bias towards this thing being true, and I don't know why I even believe it. I don't have any kind of real solid proof. I just believe in it. I just trust in it. I just have faith in it, or whatever your excuse is. They're just excuses. Do you know or do you not know exactly why you believe this? Not to be likely true. I'm saying when you believe that it is true. Certainty. Why do you have certainty? Do you have a reason? If you don't have the courage to question that, then this is like a quote that's coming up actually in my document, which I will read to you. This is one bit that I will read because I put it here for this purpose, and I'll get onto it in a minute. But anyway, yeah, so you got to have courage to look at the truth, because that's the only way that we escape from that brainwashing that, look, that they hid conspiracies in plain sight by getting people who were easy to manipulate to just laugh at the idea of haha, conspiracies kind of thing. I'm no conspiracy theorist. I'm a normal person. See, I'm accepted in my social clique and I am normal and nobody thinks that I'm at all weird. In the background, person's probably fucking a sheep or whatever. But excuse my friends. I'll probably have to cut that out, will I? I don't know. It's a joke about bestiality. I'll see how I go, all right? Maybe I'll get banned. Then I'll have to go back to the original thing, edit it, bleep it out, re-upload it. But hopefully they'll sort of say, okay, yeah, fair enough. You did mark your channel as being not friendly for kids, so we'll let that one slide. I mean, see, this is the thing with censorship these days. You just don't know how far they're going to take it. As if they'll sort of say, you were suggesting people, should go have sex with sheep. No, I wasn't. I was suggesting that some people do. I didn't say they should. I'm all for the sheep. I'm like, leave the bloody sheep alone. Good Lord. Good Lord. Anyways, so the quote that I've got here for you, which relates to all this, is from Doctor Who, one of my favourite shows, which I could go on about for ages, but instead of getting divergent on a tangent about Doctor Who, if I feel the need to, I can do a Doctor Who fan episode later, and this I'll just stick to this one quote, because this was one of the places where I went way off track and started talking about the history of Doctor Who. Anyways, so Series 9, Episode 8, the Zygon Inversion. There are some brilliant quotes throughout the whole history of Doctor Who. There are some great things that were said by John Pertwee and Tom Baker, but in the more recent series with Matt, what's his name? So the older guy, Jesus, their names don't come back to me, David Tennant. But this one's by the older guy whose surname, it's kind of like an Italian sounding name, but for some reason I'm just having a mental blank right now. But I've put the link in the document so you can go to YouTube, the BBC channel, where it's got this particular segment. But I'm going to read to you from the script here. I just cut a little section of that small section, so it's even a smaller section in the script here. So this is the Doctor speaking to Kate and Bonnie. It'll be obvious which lines are the Doctor, so I'll just say when it's Kate and Bonnie so that you know the other two lines. Okay, so beginning with the Doctor. And we're off. Fingers on buzzers. Are you feeling lucky? Are you ready to play the game? Who's going to be the quickest? Who's going to be the luckiest? Kate, this is not a game. No, it's not a game, sweetheart, and I mean that most sincerely. Bonnie, why are you doing this? Yes. Okay, now, yes, I'd like to know that too. You set this up. Why? Because it is not a game, Kate. This is a scale model of war. Every war ever fought right there in front of you, because it's always the same. And when you fire that first shot, no matter how right you feel, you have no idea who's going to die. You don't know whose children are going to scream and burn. How many hearts will be broken? How many lives shattered? How much blood will spill until everybody does what they were always going to have to do from the very beginning? Sit down and talk. Listen to me. Listen. I just want you to think. Do you know what thinking is? It's just a fancy word for changing your mind. Bonnie, I will not change my mind. Then you will die stupid. Alternatively, you could step away from that box. You could walk right out that door and you could stand down your revolution. Right, so I kind of misquoted the end there a little bit, but I wasn't nearly on it. Oh, shit, hang on. Why that? Okay, sorry. I was thinking I was scrolling something and all of a sudden it changed my zoom. I've got to get these little sort of finger gestures right. Okay, so, all right, maybe I might just play it safe and use the scroll bar over here. So basically what the Doctor was doing in this scene was that he had two apparently human beings, Kate and Bonnie, standing in front of a box each with a button in it. Each button is going to utterly destroy the other side of the conflict. One of them is really a human. The other one is really a Zygon. Nobody in the room except the Doctor knows who's who. They don't even know which one they are themselves. All they know is that they're fighting. So it's a great setup, because he's basically saying, it's like, listen, for all you know, you're both human, right? You don't even know if one of you is an alien or not. And besides which, both of you have a valid case to living and surviving because you're both original species of this planet. You know, he doesn't say all these things, but if you know the history of the story and the history of the Zygon species in the kind of whole character world of Doctor Who, then you know, yeah, like they're actually like from deep under the earth in some ancient history, something like that. But anyway, so they've got this conflict going on. And there are, of course, in each side different factions, but ultimately, I don't know if I said it in this take, it might have been from a previous take, and so in which case I'll repeat it, but there's a whole psychological phenomena which comes out of animal behavioural psychology and survival, wherein it was shown that in human conflict, people gravitate towards the two most extreme positions. Now, it's pretty easy to extrapolate from there why this would be, which is simply that if you cannot actually escape the situation entirely, and if you have any kind of vested interest in the conflict, then you're going to side with, you know, one of the two major sides for a start, being decided upon by what position they're taking, whether that aligns with your interests, and also whether or not you think they're going to win, right? Depending upon your value system and how you judge these situations, that's the side you're going to join. And typically speaking, for various other reasons, which perhaps I can do in another episode, these sides of a conflict tend to gravitate towards the most extreme positions. You know, partly just caused, obviously, directly by the conflict itself, but there are other matters as well which make that happen. And this has been studied, and so it's like, it's kind of like an obvious outcome in a way, but the study was all about the underlying mechanics of it, I guess. But anyway, so that's what people do. They gravitate towards sides, and here we have this conflict, this war setup where people are set to destroy each other. And that great line at the end where he's saying, like, thinking is just about changing your mind. Because what do you do when you think? You critique, you analyze. Now, it may very well be that your position was entirely wrong, entirely mistaken. And if you are honest and wise, you'll say, well, I don't want to believe bullshit for a single second longer than I have to, because that's not going to help me. I want to know what the truth is, independent of my perspective. I want to know about objective reality where it's possible. Now, there are some things that are not objective reality, like, for example, beauty. As they say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So if you see something as beautiful, then it legitimately and validly is beautiful to you, because that's just what the word means. It's just a perspective from each individual, what you find beautiful. There may be common things we find beautiful. There may be reasons of why we find things beautiful in common, but there are always going to be differences, and there's always going to be validity to that of some kind. So here you have these positions at war with each other, at risk of destroying each other, not even knowing whether they are actually on the side they think they're on, because they're so wrapped up in the conflict they can't think. And the doctor's sort of saying, well, like, think, change your mind, look at all of the obvious flaws in what's going on here. Thinking is just a fancy word for changing your mind, because even if you're right, there can still be something to learn to make your position even more correct. But you have to know how to distinguish between fact and fiction, which is an analytical process. Now, it may very well involve other factors like, for example, what your emotions and your intuition tell you, but they are not determining factors. They are guides which can also mislead you, right? So they're not definitive guides, but if your heart's in the right place and you understand what you're talking about, they will tend towards guiding you towards good things. If you're an ignorant fuck and you don't know anything and you're a bigot and you're an asshole, then your intuition, your feelings will probably lead you in the wrong direction, So, anyways, so he says that line. It's like, it's just about changing your mind. And then Bonnie says, I will not change my mind. Then you will die stupid. I loved that line. I seriously did, because there are so many times in my life when I want to say that to people. It's like, I don't know about you, but I've been in arguments with countless people where they literally have no interest, and they even openly state it. They have no interest in knowing what the alternative position is, and yet they claim to disagree with it. How can you disagree with something if you don't know what it is? That just doesn't even make any sense. And then if you try to point that out, they will attack logic itself. They'll say, oh, you're trying this logical stuff on me. It's like, no, please make it make sense. It's like, so here's the thing. We all, and I say this as a way of helping people get over this thing in themselves, okay? It's like, we all, no matter how intelligent we are, no matter how well educated we are, we all have the capacity to say stupid things, to think stupid things, to do stupid things. Stupidity is a temporary state if you allow it to be temporary, and the way you allow it to be temporary is know thyself. Be honest. Learn about things. Don't overstate your position. Like, if you don't know something to be certain, if you cannot prove it to be certain, then don't state it as certain. It's that simple. Just say, look, I think this might be true. I'm not sure. Here's my reasons for thinking it might be true, but hey, I could be wrong. If you say that, nobody will have a problem with what you say, right? Because you didn't give them one, right? But if you say this is definitely true, and you're not even providing a valid basis for making that assertion, then of course somebody's going to have a problem with it. Eventually you'll meet somebody who'll say, what? And they probably will have a proof. And now if you're not even listening to their proof, then you're saying, I want to stay stupid, because all of my decisions, all of my thoughts, all of my communication is based upon incorrect understanding. It's incorrect. And I don't even care, because my ego says I have to be right, I have to win. It's not winning to stay stupid. It's not winning to be a dickhead. It's not winning to belligerently defend the indefensible. It's not winning to misrepresent the other person's position. It's not winning to take things out of context in such a way where your argument would imply certain things that are logically impossible. None of that stuff is winning. That is just you being too piss weak to learn. And that is why, as the doctor said, you will remain stupid. You will die stupid. The thing that people do is that there's a sense of self, right? We want to feel good about ourselves. And it doesn't feel good to be ridiculed. We might have memories from childhood of kids teasing us at school, or a brother or sister teasing us, or, there's loads of things that can, from a young age, make you feel like being at least called in the wrong is a bad thing. It feels uncomfortable. So what do? We want to avoid it. So in the case of our beliefs, if we believe something fervently, if we believe that our identity is defined by it, right, then any critique of that thing, whether it is actually an attack on that thing or not, depending upon how sensitive the person is about the topic, could be perceived as an attack on the person, right? So you espouse some idea, I hear that, I see flaws in it, and I make a critique. Well-meaning, all in the best of intentions, all for the purpose of benefiting you. Because if I'm right, then it means you can learn something, which means you can drop a false belief. It means you can gain a greater understanding, which will improve your life. Now, do you cease being yourself when you drop belief in a falsehood? No. If anything, you become more of yourself. The less bullshit you believe in, especially the less bullshit you were programmed to believe in by other people. They're not even your thoughts. They're somebody else's thoughts, handed down generation after generation and programmed into you, right? Now, some of that stuff, handed down information, is genuine learning from the past. Like, hey, look, fire is hot. You put your hand in it, it burns you. So don't put your hand in the fire. Sure, valuable, valid knowledge, right? Other things, just garbage. But people believe it because all past generations believe it. They were given it too. And if anybody tries to critique it, it's like stepping out of the group, stepping out of the tribe mentality, stepping out of, that. And if you are the person being critiqued, then it makes you feel you're going to lose that connection, not just to yourself and your identity, which you identify with through that belief, but you're going to lose your connection to the group that also believes it. So there's survival threat. It feels like it's existential. It's not. You will actually become a better person when you lose the bullshit. You will actually become more of yourself when you lose that. The whole thing, know thyself. Neo coming into the kitchen in the Matrix with the Oracle. Know thyself. It takes courage. It takes honesty. It takes really making an effort to understand. It takes a willingness to be uncomfortable as you hear contrary information, and to observe yourself and to know this is not a threat to me. I'm just hearing a contrary view. And what I need to do is more than just compare this contrary view to my existing belief and just to argue back. I need to find out, is this person right? Maybe they are. How do I know? I've got to consider it first. And so I've been through loads of arguments, which is probably why I love the scene with the doctor. Because when he says that, you will die stupid. I mean, I can't help but to think that sometimes of people who, their position just is not logically supportable and they don't care, and I can't imagine doing that to myself. I wouldn't, it's like, if I'm wrong, I want to know it. I want to know the evidence. But then I think these people look at my position and they think that, no, you're so arrogant. Like you think you're always right. I mean, I've actually literally had people say this to me countless times. Like, you think you're always right. So to which I say, everybody does. Nobody says something that they believe to be true because they believe it to be false. That doesn't even make any sense. Everybody says everything because they think it's the right thing to say. There's no exceptions. If I say this is certain, it's because I think it is certain. If I say this is uncertain but probably true, it means that I think it's uncertain but probably true. If I say I think it's false, then it's because I think it's false. So I always think I'm right. Yes. But so do you, so does everybody. Nobody's any different. Nobody ever has been any different. The only time when it's different is when somebody's lying. When somebody's lying, they don't believe they're right because they know they're not. They're lying. So you're literally making an accusation against being honest in a way. And it's just a stupid thing to accuse somebody of. The other one is like, you think you know everything. No, I don't. It's like, the whole purpose of my attitude is to find out more. I'm well aware of the fact, and you can't know everything because there's an infinite number of things to know. And you know that I studied maths when you made that criticism, so do you not think that I understand the concept of infinity, an infinite set? I can't know the contents of an infinite set. Knowledge is an infinite set. Why would I think I knew everything in that set? No, I don't. Nobody ever will. You know, it's a ridiculous claim. The third one, of course, would be you think you're better than everybody. It's like, no, I don't. Listen, if you argue a position which is stupid and you're not listening to a valid counter-argument, and then you're doing things like, arguing against that which you clearly don't even understand what it is that you're arguing against, and which you demonstrate in statements and then you don't even see yourself doing it, then sure, I'm going to think that at least in that moment you're being a bit of a bloody idiot. Do I think that I'm right in that conversation? Yes. But your implication by saying that I think that I'm better than you or better than everybody that I take such a position with is just BS. No, I fucking don't. If you rape people, if you murder people, if you do something abhorrent like that, sure, I think I'm better than you, right? Absolutely. If you take something like that to that kind of an extreme. I don't think I'm better than anybody else. I think I'm better at arguing a case for something than most people. Sure, yeah, I'm better at that. But then the exact same person could be better than me at being an astronaut because I'm not one, at being a surgeon because I'm not one. And it's like all of us always are always. There's no exceptions through anybody's life throughout all time. We are always going to be ignorant of more things than we are aware of. There's no way to cure that because there's an infinite number of things to know. We are always going to be worse at an infinite number of things than we are good at, right? Because there's an infinite number of things that you could do, So, yeah, it's like this whole thing about thinking that you're better than other people. It's like the only people who think that they're better than other people are clearly fascists because they think that they're so bloody good that it warrants them marching in, taking land, murdering everybody, and then saying, see, we were here in the first place. And yes, that was a dig at a particular group of people currently, but let's say that I will also apply that to my home country, Australia, and to the United States and to Canada and probably a few other places. Because essentially our countries are based on the exact same BS beginning. It was an invasion, it was a conquest, it was a genocide, it was ethnic cleansing, it was land theft. And the excuses used for it of like, oh, but that's just what everybody culture was like, it's like, so it was okay. It's like, no. Even if it's true that that's what all nations or tribes or whatever beforehand were like, that doesn't make it right. It just means that like they were barbarians at that stage and we should stop bringing that barbarity into the future. It is not necessary, right? We have, for a hell of a long time, had the technology required for everybody to live a good life. Everyone, And the fact is that we just use stupid systems that are extremely inefficient, extremely wasteful, extremely destructive, extremely polluting. They are just garbage systems based upon a garbage ideology. Anyway, I'll be diverging a lot, so I'll carry on. And I've already got to do one edit to paste this together. So far as like, then you will die stupid and the whole conflict thing, and thank you very much for getting that. Okay, yep. I think I've got to maybe like disable some of the finger shortcut things on touch. I cannot stand touchpads, but I have no choice in this situation because it's all the space I've got. I can't have a mouse beside it. But yeah, I'm not a fan of touchpads. They're just a bit awkward to me. Yeah, so I think, look, the Russians understood, like if we want to look at the SMO, the Russians understood what was going on for a long time. And they knew, as the doctor said, that everybody's going to have to sit down and talk. So what did they do? So even though there was a bloody coup, even though there was a lead up to that of like, at least 2 decades. I mean, if you want to look at the period from like, the start of the 1990s through to 2014, 2015, when the coup happened, I mean, you got this, 20, 25 years during which time the West kept encroaching and was corrupting the people from Western Ukraine through to central Ukraine, getting them to believe in a narrative that they weren't really Russians. Now, some of them, fine, in the West were Poles and were Hungarians and were others. There was always a certain amount of ethnic diversity, but the vast majority of Ukraine, aside from that part which was annexed following World War II from Poland, Hungary and Romania, was it? As reparations to the Soviet Union for the fact that they sided with Nazis, right? Meaning those states that lost land to the Soviet Union. I mean, the Soviet Union did us all a favour. They, and the Chinese, with the help of the Mongolians too and a few others, they basically beat the fascist horde of Nazi Germany at the time, right? Now, mind you, the German people themselves were, to some degree, victims of that as well, because what happened there... And shit, I'm going to go on a divergent again. I'll leave that for another episode, okay? So let's just get back to the SMO. So the Russians basically saw this lead up. They knew that everybody had to sit down and talk. They had Minsk 1.0, they had Minsk 2.0. They probably also, I suspect, although Putin describes it differently, and I don't know whether to pronounce his name Putin or Putin, but yeah, anyway, Putin. I don't know. Putin sounds better. I think it's got a little bit of a lilt to it. it's a good kind of Irish poetically. Putin. Anyway, so I think they kind of knew not only the lead up, but I think they also knew that agreement, or those agreements, were going to be betrayed by the West and by Ukraine. I'm pretty sure that they knew that. When you listen to Putin being interviewed, he kind of plays innocent and plays nice and plays... not so much dumb, but he plays ignorant of the pre-knowledge of that coming betrayal at that time. And he says, yeah, we signed the agreements and effectively they betrayed those agreements, and, this was disappointing to us. So why does he frame it in this way if he was aware of what was going to happen? If he was fully aware? Well, there's a few reasons. One is that I think that following all the economic trouble and other trouble that the USSR went through, and then the following Russian Federation recovering from the collapse of the Soviet Union and so forth, and the looting of the country as well. I mean, there was a lot of looting that went on. And mind you, all of that following from the aftermath of World War II, because although they won it, they beat everything that got sent against them, and then they had their troops in Berlin, so it's the Russians won, but they were exhausted. They could probably keep fighting still and probably keep winning because they're a strong bloody people, but they were nonetheless exhausted. They wanted the fight to be over. They'd had enough, right? So I think this is also where the West, who were pretending to fight the Nazis on the Western Front, where they faced a fraction of what the Soviets and the Chinese faced, right? So they're pretending to fight them. And from a military point of view, yeah, they did fight them. But in the background, what are they really doing? They're materially aiding them, They're sending, all sorts of resources back and forth, and including, engines from Ford Motor Company and steel and all sorts of different things. I mean, basically, they were supplying Germany. And if you read into the history of it, there is that open admission that the agenda was to keep Germany down, Europe kind of fractured and dependent upon the USA, and Russia out, right? They wanted to break that relationship with Russia. They wanted to also disempower Russia. So the idea was to get the Russians and the Germans fighting each other. So briefly, you have the German Workers' Socialist Movement getting railroaded by fascists and Nazis, with Hitler's crowd, who then continue with the name socialist, but they weren't in any respect socialist people. This is why some people believe that socialism is that, when it's not. That was fascism and Nazism. The group that they railroaded and infiltrated was a workers' socialist movement, which they took control of and kept the name and pretended it was socialism when it was anything but. And so all of this kind of warfare and conflict comes through to the present day. We know that history. We know that the Soviets were tired. The Russians had to kind of rebuild things. They had to go through a different kind of process to rebuild their society and to reconfigure it. They tried to make friends with the West. They didn't want to be fighting, but the more time went on and the more various kind of corrupt people within the Russian Federation and prior to that within the Soviet Union kind of betrayed the interests of their own country for the benefit of Westerners and for their own personal benefit, so you get somebody like Putin coming along who understands that history. So what does he know? He knows that he has to sit down and talk. He knows they're going to betray that. So he gives them an opportunity to do the right thing while simultaneously pretending weak, pretending ignorant, pretending, well, not weak, but weaker than they really are, pretending they're not ready. And what does that do? It means that the West has an opportunity to show good intentions by not attacking where they think they could, and by doing the right thing, sticking to the agreements, and let's all have peace. So what Putin achieved was to get the West to admit we have bad, malicious intention, because given the opportunity, we're coming in. And it doesn't matter how much we might have agreed to the contrary, fuck that, we want to steal and rob and murder, right? So he knows that. He knows the possibility. He gives them the opportunity to prove otherwise, but they don't. But he sets up like this whole thing of like being able to engineer cauldron after cauldron after cauldron on the battlefield with his military advisors, probably them the ones coming up with it. I don't know if Putin himself has that kind of military strategy knowledge. I wouldn't be surprised if he did. He seems to be a highly intelligent and well-educated man. But I would imagine that most of it probably comes from the military experts. And so they set up that scenario. They had also spent ages kind of ramping up industrial production and doing so as quietly as possible, I would imagine, to maintain the illusion that they were not as strong as they were, and but at the same time, they still needed time to build up stocks and reserves of things, because they knew that there's no way to predict exactly how this conflict will come along. Now, it could come along soft at first and then harder and harder and harder, or it could just come in whoomp from day one, right? So they have to be prepared for either possibility. But they also have to plan for, well, what is the best outcome for us under all circumstances? And kudos to all of the Russian military personnel who took such great risks in the early days of the conflict, and many of whom died, because I'm sure they probably knew that it was a huge risk what they were doing. Because essentially what they were doing was they were allowing themselves to be bait, right? Because how do you, in the openly stated agenda of the SMO, which I'm sure would have been discussed previously, it's like, if it does go in this direction and they do betray the agreements, this is what we're going to do, right? And then they just come out and said it. It was already planned. So what are they going to do? They're going to sort of, denazify, demilitarize. How do you do that? Well, you have to suck it in first, right? You always fight on your terms. And they were fighting on their terms. They were willing to lay down lives for it. So when you see like the casualties in the conflict, early on, the Russians suffer some big losses because of the things necessary to set up the later situation, right? And because of also that final opportunity to get your opponent to back down. It's like, hey, come on, we had Minsk 1, you betrayed that. We had Minsk 2, you betrayed that. This is really your last chance. Back down. And the West were run by idiots. Now, Kiev were ready to give in, at least some of them, at some points. But of course, the more extremist factions, along with Boris Johnson and others, forced it into the conflict. They didn't want those agreements, and they certainly didn't want a third one. It was like, no, we're doing this. And mind you as well, remember that these agreements are going on while they have military forces on the borders of Donetsk and Lugansk attacking, killing people. They've been doing all this stuff for a long time by the time the SMO starts. But remember that those negotiations for the Minsk agreements happened along the way. So they've had a bloody coup, put in an illegitimate government that is, basically just a puppet for the West. They replace him with another puppet. They gradually kind of write legislation to rule out any rights or any contrary views from anybody, you know, banning alternative political parties, banning media, all that kind of stuff. So there's just like one voice, and it's all murder spree, you know, let's go kill Russians, you know. And so imagine that you're Putin, imagine that you're Lavrov, or you know, and I don't know how much involvement Medvedev and Zakharova have to do with all this kind of earlier stage stuff. I don't know enough about their history, but I could imagine that whichever ones of these people and other people in the military were involved from the Russian side, they would be looking at that history, they would be looking at that lead up, they would have known this was a possibility, they were trying to provide an out for their enemy to say, listen, seriously, you're not listening to us, we can beat you, we can, so don't do this. Because we don't want it. We just want peace. We just want to trade with the Chinese and enjoy our lives and let our people improve. That we just want that. We just want to live a happy life, for God's sakes. Just none of this war stuff. But the West, being run by insane people, you know, weren't listening. And therein lies, I think, I guess the flaw in the implication of that scene with Doctor Who, because it's like it implies that there are not evil people, there are not irrational people, there are not insane people with nefarious agendas and conspiring for profiteering off mass murder, you know, and the whole military industrial thing. And meanwhile, Western leaders could have at any stage since really the 1970s, where they started really degrading Western society, they could have reversed course. They could have said, you know what, we've been already starting to take funding out of education and funding out of health and funding out of roads, and it doesn't seem to be going in a very good direction. Maybe this is dumb. Maybe we should actually, instead of putting all of our money into the military, maybe we should do what the Chinese and Russians are doing, and so many other nations do. Maybe we should just specialize in whatever our people turn out to be good at, and we do that, and they like our stuff and they pay us for it, and we like their stuff and we pay them for it. You know, they could have done that at any stage. It doesn't matter that you don't have 1 billion people like China or India. It doesn't matter, you know, that, you know, it's like you can be a small nation and still produce something unique. And I'll tell you why. The reason why you can do it is because every nation's language and culture is effectively a different psychological framework. So when you are thinking inside your own mind or communicating with another person, your whole approach to information itself, to understanding itself, is based upon, I know, every time I knock the deck, I get a bang in the audio, so apologies for that. That's why it's a bit cramped here. But so it's like our culture and our language basis has a philosophical impact on our ideas. And so there are certain things which are unique to the Russian mentality because of the Russian language, the Russian culture. There are certain things which are unique to the Chinese language and culture. There are certain things unique to Korean, Japanese, you know, whatever, you know, anywhere you go, you're going to find some very unique things because the language itself has a different logical structure. Now, maybe a lot of them are based upon something extremely similar because, of course, we're trying to relate to the external world, which includes talking to people of other cultures with other languages, which means that over time, there is a convergence of language, which happens naturally because we have to be able to translate between languages. But as you would be well aware, if you've ever dealt with anybody from another native language, there are certain phrases and idioms and things that don't translate well, certain sense of humor that doesn't translate well. Now, that's just one example, but it's an example of how this difference in thinking can manifest. So while the Chinese have an enormous population, while they have an enormous manufacturing base, while they have enormous resources in certain areas, it's not like your country too doesn't have lots of people, lots of resources and things. I mean, unless your country is like landlocked and very, very small and very restricted and you've been dominated and robbed for ages by imperialists, you know, where that would be a fair enough excuse. But for most other countries that haven't had that happen to them. Well, actually, maybe I'm wrong to use the word most, given the idiots and what they've done in this world for so long. But anyway, you know what I mean? It's like, so for any country to whom this hasn't happened, then they should have adequate resources to supply a population of a certain size with a great lifestyle, and to invest in those people, to invest in their own infrastructure, to invest in their education system, to set up diplomatic relations with other countries where you can learn from their culture, to maximize the benefit coming out of your academic sector of the things that people discover and think, and not just in the fields of like science and engineering and other kind of, you know, practical, pragmatic things like that, but also in the beautiful and useful field of arts where, you know, look, a beautiful painting is a great thing. Russians admire their artists, their writers and so forth, not just their sort of, you know, intellectual academic class. They really admire their artistic class. They're great philosophers and thinkers, you know. The West, what do we have? I mean, like shit, like you see, switch on the TV, what do you see? Sport, 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 join the sport, it's sport, it's sport, it's sport, it's sport, 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 sport. You know, that's not the way that you develop an intelligent society. And I'm not saying that sport isn't a good thing. Sure, we should all be active, and God, I wish I was more active. I have to suffer through injuries and limitations financially and other stuff, so I'm not getting anywhere near the exercise that I should get and the exercise that I used to get, and it's been a massive hit on my lifestyle and my well-being. So I'm not saying sport isn't valuable, but it's like if you base your entire culture around it the way that Australia has, like basically, I mean, I love Stephen Hughes, a great comedian. Steve Hughes has this joke about how he didn't fit into Australia because he was not terribly keen on the national part-times being sport and bigotry, which is brilliant because I kind of feel the same way. And at some point, if anybody sort of reminds me, I'll tell you an example of that. But anyway, yeah. So look, I really think that Lavrov and Putin and whoever else was involved, they saw all this stuff coming. They knew the history of what had happened ever since, like, you know, World War II and from before, clearly. But particularly since World War II, because that was when you had what I think was really a mistake on the part of the Soviet Union to take as reparations that land while it contained a social element of Banderites. It's like you're accepting a poison into your body, right? Now, maybe it was the only form of reparations they could take because maybe the other nations were all economically exhausted following the fight, and so how are you going to get anything in reparation for the damage you've suffered because of the actions of others? Well, okay, take some land. Fair enough. But if it's got the people on it and those people hate you, then they're a poison into that culture, and that's what happened. And the forces of NATO and the West, I don't know when NATO was formed, but I think it was after World War II. So at some point NATO comes into the equation, but let's just refer to them as NATO because they're the same people anyway. So following World War II, what do they see? Well, they see, okay, so the Soviet Union gets this. We kind of failed to really get in there and loot them as much as we wanted to, but we'll have another go at it later. In the meantime, and I don't know, for all I know, maybe they suggested that land reparations thing to the Soviet Union. Maybe they put the idea in their head. Who knows? But for whatever reason, that was clearly seen as an opportunity, because from at least as early as 1967, and if I find it, I don't know where it is, but I did have a link for a Freedom of Information Act document, PDF, on the CIA website where they openly admit their interference in Ukraine since 1967. Now, I heard from another academic friend of mine that it actually dates back a lot further than that, like a lot closer to the finish of the Second World War. So 1948, probably what happened would have been that the USA and the UK got busy with the whole Israeli occupation of Palestine project. So that kind of took a few years, because they also wanted to destabilize, you know, that whole region with, you know, the Arabic nations, and they wanted to, you know, have a foothold there, and they wanted to steal oil from there and so forth, and to keep those people divided, because of course that creates a block between Russia and Europe and Asia versus Africa, right? Because the pathway through, well, now you're going to go around a little bit, you know, so it doesn't stop them from getting there, but of course the USA wants to plunder Africa, and they want to plunder it even at the expense of their allies, Europe. So if they can create a blockage on the way through, then yeah, sure, their allies can get in as well. And sure, Russia and China can go around. So everybody can kind of get in, but the US sort of has unfettered access. And so I think that it probably would have been maybe the 1950s at some stage when they'd kind of got enough set up with the occupation in Palestine to then focus on the whole, Western Ukraine thing. And at some point they basically started just like sort of really, really pushing an agenda there to brainwash people into taking up the fascism, the Nazism, the anti-Russia ideology, knowing that after a few generations of breeding and brainwashing, they're going to have this army of really fervent Russia-hating people. And there's a documentary produced by a Russian filmmaker called Nikita, I think Nikita something or other. I'll see if I can find it, and if I can, I'll link it into one of these documents when I publish it. But he showed footage from a primary school in Western Ukraine, which looks like from the footage is probably from around the 1990s. And the shocking thing is these classrooms full of kids being taught not just to hate Russia and Russians, but to even hate another child with a Russian-sounding name, right? So they're just being taught to hate. And they have this one little bit where there's this girl, probably no older than 6, and this little girl is ranting about how she's going to butcher Russians. And it was really quite shocking to watch, not in the sense that I'm shocked that evil people would do that, because nothing shocks me about what they would do, but more so just shocking to actually see it, like just the level of child abuse, to brainwash a child into that kind of hateful ideology. And here's the thing as well, it's like, this is how shit their ideology is. It's like, if your ideology is so bad that you have to brainwash people into it from childhood, and you haven't woken up to the fact that that's what defines it as shit, because no rational person, no free-thinking adult who'd never been brainwashed would choose your ideology. Your only way to get them is to get them at birth, or get them when they're really, really vulnerable, and hammer it into them and fill them with drugs and do other things to get them on side. Then why is your ideology so shit? Why can't you just explain it to people and people say, fuck, that's brilliant, I'd love to be a part of that, please, where do I sign up? You see, that's the difference between something which is worthy and not worthy. You guys have an entirely hypocritical, shitty, fucked up, dumb as anything ideology. It is not sustainable on an ecological level, it's not sustainable on an economic level, it's not sustainable on a socio-political level. It's just stupid in every regard. And you're stupid for not seeing that. And you're an asshole for pushing it onto people and killing people if they don't comply. All for what? So that you can eventually fail, and like maybe if there's one or two of the rest of us surviving, we'll say, see, we told you so. Told you you're being a dickhead. Told you you're being an asshole. And what is it then? You'll finally wake up and you mean that I'm the evil one who murders people for no good cause? Oh shit. Is that really what it would take for you to wake up to this? See, and this is why I think like these people cannot be sane, because there's no way that a rational, sane person would ever follow such an ideology. It just makes no sense. It is self-defeating in every regard. And to the contrary, to call it winning and to pretend like you're special, and it's like literally these people labeling themselves as leaders, and like God, the worst one is like thought leader. Oh God, I heard the exact same stuff in the 1980s, and it wasn't original back then, and it's definitely not your original thought. So don't call yourself a thought leader on LinkedIn. You're an idiot. The fact that other people are even less well read than you, it's not that impressive. Anyway, so. Yeah, don't hold back, Trev. Alrighty. Anyways, I kind of lost where I was again anyway. So, yeah, look, so I was just sort of thinking about this whole thing of, why would you want to die stupid? Why would you want to not believe... And I'm not just saying believe in conspiracies. What I'm saying is that you should at least understand why conspiracies are commonplace. And instead of believing or not believing, go investigate, research it, come to a critical conclusion where you're looking at it and saying, okay, There is definitely a conspiracy that happened. Why? Because we have all the evidence that people, two or more people, conspired to achieve something. So that's not in question, and I totally acknowledge that. The next part is whether or not it was for a nefarious agenda. Okay, was it? And then you analyze that bit. And the next bit is like, was it kept covert or overt? Did they lie about it? Blah, blah, blah. So you get like all the detail out of it. You don't just like dumb it down to like one single thing of like, is this very vague description, which is little more than a brand name for some event that may or may not have happened. Do I believe in that or not? Like, what kind of a question is that? Sorry. I really am crammed in here. It's like I've got my bin down there. I've got the microphone stand here. I've got a bookshelf, but it's like, yeah. Oh God, I need my own place. What I wouldn't do to have my own house. All right. Anyway, so yeah. So I really think that they saw it coming. They prepared for it. They knew that it had to happen. That they wanted to give the West an out because they would prefer peace, because they knew shit, people are going to die. And they would prefer to sit down and talk. Why? Because they don't know whose children are going to scream and burn. That was the understanding. The understanding that the doctor espouses in that scene is exactly the understanding that I think the Russians had, and which I think that perhaps they did make some mistakes in how they went about it, but I can certainly see that if my suspicions are correct, I can see why they went about it the way that they did. I honestly wish that I could have been there to give them some tips to improve it and to hopefully make the outcome even better. But I don't think that anybody could have improved it to the point of preventing the special military operation, for the simple reason that most of the causational momentum happened decades before. You know, it does go back to the Second World War. It does go back even further than that, you know. And so like like with any other graph of things, it tends to be like, running like pretty flat for most of the time, but then eventually you get to a much steeper curve, because the more things that happen, the more things can happen, you know. It's like they're all little parts of a machine, and the more of the parts that are present, the more functionality becomes present for the thing to grow and evolve. And that's why it very suddenly gets quite steep, because you hit this critical threshold where you have enough functionality there that things can rapidly change. And that wasn't possible until you pass that critical threshold. And that's why you see graphs that go flat, and then there's this hinge point, and then they go up. And that's really kind of what happened, I think, is that they were coming along late in the scene because they had a history to deal with of repairing the damage done through not only the the accidental damage and the inevitable damage of a social experiment on the scale of the Russian Revolution, through to the formation of the Soviet Union, the experimentation with ideas on how to organize a society differently to the way that it had always been done everywhere else they knew, and then getting attacked, and then getting economically attacked simultaneously, and getting defamed, and all the other things that happened. They had to repair, stabilize, build things up, develop. They could see what was sort of coming towards them, and it was looking more and more certain over time, and they knew that at some point it was going to accelerate. So they just had to get ready and then plan when they were going to begin prior to that point of acceleration to prevent the acceleration ever occurring. And that's what the demilitarization part is about as well. Had Russia not come in at least as early as where they had done, then the risk that you run is the West kind of comes in, and because you acted too late, they get to that rapid upward rise and they actually overwhelm you, even if you have technical superiority. That's a possibility which fortunately no longer exists. The Russians successfully prevented that from coming about. But that was the choice they were faced with. They knew that there were decisions, like there was no good outcome, there was just less shitty outcomes, and they chose the one which they felt was the least shitty, with the least number of innocent people dying. And I think in doing so, they've proven that they are not at risk of dying stupid. The Western leaders, on the other chance, it's pretty much a certainty they're going to die stupid, because they don't have reverse gears, they don't learn, they're just not willing to consider that they might be wrong, that their whole ideology is fucked up. They're certainly not willing to consider that they're batshit crazy, How could they be batshit crazy? You know, I'm special. I was born to this bloodline. I'm a superior. I'm an exceptional elite person. I shit gold. You know, whatever the hell it is they believe about themselves, they are nutters. Anyway, so next time somebody calls you a conspiracy theorist, please do laugh at them, you know, ridicule that position. I mean, do not accept and do not validate the notion that conspiracies don't happen, or that being a conspiracy theorist is a bad thing. You know, don't say I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Say, yeah, of course I'm a bloody conspiracy theorist. I'm a conspiracy realist. Like, do that thing where you switch the narrative back on them, because they're the one who has to justify that conspiracies don't happen. They've just asserted it without providing any evidence, and in the face of mountains of evidence to the contrary. So don't validate the narrative. That's an important one. All right, one little final point here, I guess, before I switch to the second document. So I think one of the reasons why people do back down in the face of fascism is because they're afraid of the threats. It's like, we're going to economically impoverish you, we are going to hurt you, we are going to kill you, we're going to hurt the people you love. You know, it's like there's all of these threats of various scales and scopes and types. And people, you know, even just the implication of a threat, even if the threat is never made, the fact that you live in a society where you see it happen to Julian Assange, like, that is essentially a threat to you too. They don't have to make the threat directly. You just sort of think, oh shit, that's what happens when I tell the truth. That's what happens when I expose criminality. Now, what Julian said to all of us was, keep fighting, you know, keep researching, keep doing this stuff, keep speaking, truth to power, you know. So he knew what could happen to him, and he was saying, don't be upset by what you see happen to me, accepting insofar as, yeah, please help me get, I would love to get out of this, but I've made these decisions knowing that I could get into the situation, and that what I really, really want is for you guys to keep fighting. Now, hopefully your fight will get me out of here as well, but don't stop fighting just because you're afraid of what happened to me. They can't put all of you in jail, you know. They need you way more than you need them. And to which, this is the thing that I wanted to add to it, which is a little kind of phrase of my own. I say to people, look, there's nothing they can threaten you with that is actually worse than what they will do if you comply. Because what they will do if you comply is their conspiracies just keep going and get bigger and grander. And potentially there is a critical threshold where there's no turning back the damage that they've done. There's no turning back, like the kind of, you know, social controls that they implement. There's no turning back their power, right? Now, I'm not suggesting that's the only possibility. I'm just saying that it is possible that such a set of consequences exists, that past some critical threshold, there is some irretrievably bad situation, at least for some significant period of time, and we will all regret that. You know, that we didn't stop it before it got there. In much the same way as, you know, when Putin said that he wishes he'd actually started the SMO earlier, right? But mind you, he's probably saying that knowing full well that had he started it earlier, that may have also been a mistake in, and I mean, none of us have access to this information, but with respect to their industrial preparation, because the longer they left it before starting it, the more resources they could build up in the background, right? And now we know they went in there initially with a small force. They were doing their best to support the people of Donetsk and Donbass, Donetsk and Lugansk, and Donbass, the whole region. You know, that they were helping them out as much as they could in the background to defend themselves against, like, the Nazis kind of coming up and setting up on their borders and trying to kill them, and who had fully taken over the rest of Ukraine. But, like, where do you begin the conflict? Well, you have to demonstrate to the entire world that you aren't blameless. We did negotiate once, we did negotiate twice, they broke both agreements. We offered them more than they had any reason to expect. The history books show that what we offered them was generous. You know that our adversaries would never offer any such thing if the role was reversed. Now, maybe most people don't think that deeply about it, but essentially that's what Russia was saying. They were saying, see, we are blameless. Why? Because they knew they could be betrayed. Then what do? So then they go into the special military operation, and in the background they'd build up enough resources that, so long as the Donbass could hold off long enough, they could come in. Now they hoped at first that Kiev would just back down when they brought in that relatively small force nearby Kiev, like the whole siege of Kiev, which is not what it was. It was a small force just to be there on the boundary saying, are you sure about this? Are you sure you don't want to negotiate like one last time? They gave them every out. And when it became apparent that was a no, they withdrew that force. That is not a siege. They didn't even bring a siege force. All they did was bring a small force to say, hi, we're here. Are you really sure about this? Because we're getting ready. We are going to fuck you up. That was effectively the message. And yeah, I guess the people in power in the West and those in power in Kiev were stupid. Anyways, so the world that these fascists will set up, it is truly, it's appalling. You just look at the way that they think about everything. Like, they are literally like vampires. They are, except without the whole kind of sexiness of the image in movies. They're just the kind of blood-sucking freak. You notice that when they speak of themselves, they don't want to hear the word parasite. They'll say, no, I'm a predator, I'm a lion, and a lion doesn't apologize to sheep. They don't want to hear the word predator when you're talking about the way they treat kids, do they? Oh, no, we didn't do that. I've never been to Jeffrey Epstein's island. Oh, no, I'm not a predator. But I'm a predator, I'm a lion, So this whole thing of language, no, you're a parasite. The only time at which you're a predator is when you are picking on the weak, the vulnerable, the innocent. That is your one time you're a predator. You don't go up against peers, and this is why. Look at the SMO. You're having your ass handed to you. Why? Because they are strong. Because they have nothing to prove to anyone, right? They still do it out of good relations. They say, see, we want to prove to you that we negotiate in good faith. We honor our commitments, right? That's what they've always done. And they continued to supply fuel to the very people attacking them by proxy because they had contracts saying they would. What does that say? What would the West have done in similar circumstances? The West would have said, we have these contracts to supply stuff with you, but you're using it to attack us, so despite the contract, we're cutting you off and we're keeping your money as well. So we'll keep our goods and we'll keep your money. That's what they would have done. And we all know that. Anyway, I'll switch to the second document here. So that's kind of like, I stayed way better on track than with the previous takes. So I know this is still going quite long, but anyway, so second document was about stupidity as culture, because this is the other aspect of, brainwashing and social control, is that it's a lot easier to control people when they're dumb. And there's two main ways of making people dumb. One is through information and the other one's through nutrition. Because if you attack somebody's central nervous system with brain-damaging toxic materials, be they heavy metals, or be they, some kind of chemistry that interferes with a process, or just kind of starves resources to the central nervous system, like, you're going to end up with somebody who is effectively, at least temporarily, brain damaged because of that impediment. The other way through information is just to basically fill people's heads full of, flawed logic, faulty reasoning, and, false narratives. You do that, and if people accept these things as facts, and if people accept these things as valid logic, then every thought they have is going to kind of get dumber and dumber. And you can manipulate that further by making them feel insecure and making them feel that security is attached to holding on to the false belief, holding on to the flawed reasoning, right? If you can convince people that their identity and their well-being is connected to all this bullshit, then they will defend it. They'll say, this is me, I have to defend this. But it's not you. You are less you with that bullshit in your head than at any other time. And you are most you when you get rid of it. So, unfortunately, there are sciences and studies which go into looking at how exactly we manage to brainwash people, into believing things. And it's quite a developed science from what I understand. It's not something that I've ever really gotten into studying in depth, but I have a kind of basic grasp of it, and I can imagine things that would fit within it from my studies elsewhere in biology and evolution and genetics and other matters. But yeah, like from the whole kind of like, was it sort of, neurolinguistic programming, all these kind of things about the science of mind, I do kind of get it, the way that information works. And one of the things that I've noticed the most, though, is just the misuse of language. And a really good example of this, which I'll give you, is the misuse of the terms lawful, legal, unlawful, illegal. Now, most people use these words where they are synonyms, right? So lawful and legal are considered to be synonymous. They're not. They are not synonyms. Same thing, illegal, unlawful. Most people consider them to be synonyms. They are not, right? Typically speaking, a correct interpretation of language for a single language should not have any redundancies in the lexicon, in the dictionary of that language, without some reason for the redundancy. Okay? What I mean by this is there's no point having two identical words unless you specifically state how and why there's a reason for it. And when you look at lawful and legal, the first thing that you want to understand is that, and I actually got this directly from my law professor when I briefly studied law at La Trobe University, and the lecturer, she was a practicing attorney. I believe she still is. She was the author of the textbook we use, and she went into a great deal of detail about the history of the common law and various other matters. And I did also study contract law as well and a few other things, and then privately studied other forms of law too, just because I found the subject matter fascinating. But essentially, she told us about how... Okay, sorry, I've lost my train of thought there again, so hopefully it'll come back to me. Lawful and legal. So in the legal profession, and this goes back quite a while, they actually invented their own language. They combined elements of French, Latin, Greek, English, and various other Latins to construct a language which only lawyers and judges would understand, right? The whole purpose of which, of course, was to exclude other people from understanding the discussion in law. So that's just to give you an idea of just how long the history of the deception is. So this goes back hundreds of years, I think. It's like this is a very, very old part of it. I mean, even like contract law dates back to Roman times, right? Like the origin of contract law is Roman law. So a lot of these things are a lot older than you might realize. But they constructed this language to deceive people, to exclude them from the process, and I would bet money so that what they could do would be to, because you could easily achieve this, having that deceptive language in place, is to provide a legal outcome of a particular case which was biased in somebody's favor while pretending to apply the law equally, right? And the way that you do that is by deceiving people with language. So knowing that they were that deceptive, then what you want to understand is that it's very easy to understand from there how this legal and lawful not being synonymous comes about and why it comes about. Now, lawful means specifically that something abides by the law. Legal only means that something is of or pertaining to the law. It doesn't mean that it abides by it, it means that it is of or pertaining to. So something can be legal and yet unlawful. Something can be lawful and yet illegal, right? And so they use these deceptions as a way of convincing people of all sorts of different things, and by biasing legal outcomes. So therefore, those legal outcomes are not necessarily lawful outcomes, because what you might be doing is breaking the law to provide a legal outcome for a particular client. And a second sort of thing just in this area just quickly is where people mistake legislation as law. Legislation is not law. Legislation is social or corporate contract, right? It comes under contract law. It is subject to the law. It has a field of law pertaining to it. In fact, it has multiple fields of law pertaining to it because it is social or corporate contract, so therefore it comes under contract law in part. It is civil law because it's not criminal law. Though it may have elements which are pertaining to criminal law, but it itself is civil law. It is agreement, so it's just social. It's not, it's only by proxy ever about criminal law. And it is statute law. So there's this area of law called statute law, which is about statutes or legislation. So it is there to govern legislation and to interpret legislation. It doesn't mean that legislation is law. It's an area of law pertaining to legislation. Constitutional law, of course, also affects it because that affects it by way of limiting the powers of government, right? Because the whole purpose of constitutional law is not about sort of saying you, the citizenry, our assets, our resources, our, we're the rulers, we own you. And here's the Constitution, which is our authority to power and our legislation to govern you, the resource, and to own you and control you. That's not how it's supposed to work. How it's supposed to work is that the Constitution limits the government because the whole thing is they are supposed to be your servant. Public service, right? But of course, wealthier interests railroad the whole thing, so it's just the public service of the wealthy. Everybody else, fuck you. You're our slaves. Anyway, so on stupidity as culture, you have to use language in a misleading way to, deceive people. You have to use logic and brainwash people in a logic which are, sort of faulty constructs so that they will think in a way that doesn't actually work, but they won't notice that the logic they used is invalid. And so how things got this way is a very, very long history. And I mean, look, there's things that I wrote here as well. Like, they're really brief. This is not attempting to go into detail, but I bring up some interesting points there along the way, which you can read about if you care to. Now, stupidity as success. Here's another thing, like where we worship stupidity. And I have a favorite phrase, which you can quote me on again. It's another one of mine, where I basically say success at a stupid objective is still stupid. If what you are doing is arguably going to do more harm than good, even if you are isolating the good that you are counting, like you're cherry picking your data to only count those things which affect you positively, and everything else you're not counting, right? So that biases the data to make it look like, yes, I profited. No, you didn't. You pursued a stupid objective, and even though you succeeded at it, that objective was still stupid, and you're stupid for not seeing it. But we worship this stupidity. Why? Because success, because money, because power, because fame, right? It worked for them in that limited context. And the reason why people worship that is because they're very shallow. They're not thinking. They just want an easy way out. They don't want all the difficulty. They don't want the thinking. They just want it all to be easy. Well, that would be fine if we lived in a world where everybody was nice. But the fact is we don't. Now, funnily enough, while writing the article in front of me, I was actually watching episodes of House MD, where Hugh Laurie's character, Dr. Gregory House, says to his team, what's life without the ability to make stupid choices? And this is a separate thing. It's like, I don't see this as being the same, and I completely, in this regard, agree with his character statement, because it's like, what he's talking about there is making kind of foolish choices, having a bit of fun. Yeah, you make some mistakes, and fine, yeah, it might hurt you a little bit, but it's like you're young and stupid and full of energy and just want to go exploring and do stuff. And even as you get older, like sometimes you might want to just like break the mold and break the habits and get out of a rut and go do something stupid, That's what he's referring to there. That's a separate issue. And I think that to some degree, it's like just a choice of words, really, because we don't have to call it stupid. We just call it playful. We could call it mischievous. stupid is just a choice of words. It's not necessarily actually stupid. What we're talking about is the difference between having a bit of fun and doing something a bit crazy versus being an idiot, being a hypocrite, going after a stupid objective and then thinking that you're great if you somehow succeed at it, like when it doesn't matter whether you succeeded, that was an idiotic objective. And war for profit, I would argue, is a stupid objective. Like, it seems to me obvious that if you want to cure the ills of the United States, aside from getting all the corruption out of politics, I'm not even going to begin to talk about that in this video, but the thing that you would have to do within some strategic plan is to take the military arms and armaments manufacturing sector out of private ownership and put it back into public hands. Now, you would need, as I said, the politicians have got to be not corrupt and the whole system not corrupt for you to do that, because then it's going to be no different if it's just going from one corrupt place to another corrupt place. But if you've taken the profit motive out of war, that's the point. Because the whole reason we have so much war is because of the privatized arms industry, right? So they're making a hell of a lot of money out of machines of death. It's in their financial interests, if they're idiots, to just keep destroying stuff and killing people because, hey, we sold more of our weapons. You know, hey, I'm richer and I get to snort some cocaine and have more hookers or whatever, and my wife doesn't care because I don't care about her and she doesn't care about me. It's all just for show, and she has male hookers, you know, I mean, whatever. I don't know what their lifestyle is. I'm just kind of going from whatever the latest TV show is, you know. But yeah, so yeah, it's like we need to have far wiser and smarter heads in power in the world. And instead what we do is we worship sports people, you know, because what, they could kick an inflated pigskin through some sticks. I mean, I would love, especially if I didn't have the spinal damage, especially if I didn't have the other injuries, to be able to get up and with a mate, go out for a day and kick a footy back and forward. Fine, yeah, a couple of guys chatting, kicking a footy. I'll do that. But do I want to go to a stadium again and again and again and again and buy all the sports clothes and support my team and rah, 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 you know, yeah, no. I mean, look, I'll do that once with somebody else who loves it like that, and I'll enjoy it because they're enjoying it. Like, I'll share in their enjoyment, and it becomes special because I see that culture thing. But I have no desire to go there the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth time in a row over a particular sports season. I'd rather just go to, like, you know, if I was going to do it, it would be a good friend, go to this game and that game, that's fine, that'll do me for the entire fucking season. Let's go to the pub afterwards, see if there's some good looking, you know, sort of women around, and drink some beers and have a good time. You know, it's like, that would be the purpose. Yeah. Anyway, so if where are we? Yeah, so that whole thing about, like, you know, what's life without a bit of being stupid? Yeah, I mean, look, I've been skydiving before. Now, you might argue that's stupid, you know, and they jokingly sell T-shirts where it says, you know, I jumped out of a perfectly good aircraft at 11,000 feet. You know, it's like, yeah, you could look at that as stupid, but it's also fun, and you do have to have some fun in life. But I just think that we shouldn't worship stupidity. And by the way as well, I'm not saying all sports people are stupid. I'm not. I'm just saying that the culture of it, of like ramming it down, like the over-commercialization of it, the rah, 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 the sports commentators, blah, 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 who just say meaningless shit. You know, and it's like, it is so tedious. It is so fucking God almightily tedious listening to that shit. I will happily watch a sports game between brilliant sports people, and I will admire their skill, and I might even also cheer along. But it's the commercialization of it which I think cheapens it, you know, and it's the use of it as a kind of social religion for social control, and people not even seeing how they're being used in that way. Because what? Because you're being put in a team. You're being, you know, sold to wear the colours of the team, to shout the team's name, to not like the other team. They're training you. It's the whole Pavlov's dogs things again, you know. So when the next war comes along, you'll put on your team's sweater and you'll say, kill him, you know. Anyway, So if by comparison to jumping out of a perfectly good aircraft, your idea of fun is to invade another country and murder people, then I reckon you need a new hobby. Anyways, so yeah, and look, I mean, warfare does what? I'm kind of jumping to this because, my train of thought there was very different to my train of thought at the moment. Warfare does what? Like, it expends vast amounts of resources. It's like the global military represents something like the equivalent of the world's fourth or fifth largest country if it was a country. And that's not even including the cost of resources destroyed in the form of infrastructure and so forth. It's not even including the cost of opportunity lost of the creative and potentially technically brilliant minds of all the people who die. It's not including the cost, the intangible cost of the suffering and the misery and the hospitalization services ongoing for people who might be crippled for life. There's so many costs that are probably not counted in that. I'm pretty sure that fourth or fifth largest country thing is just based on resource usage alone. And there are so many other costs that go into the equation, and I would argue that without warfare, the world would, and just this one thing alone, and there are countless other areas of waste and idiocy and inefficiency, but like just by getting rid of like the financial incentive for warfare alone, which is the cause of most warfare. I mean, even if you look at the 30 Years' War between Christians and Muslims, back in the Middle Ages or whenever it was, it's like that 30 Years' War, somebody had to pay for it, right? Now, they claim that it was all ideological, Christians versus blah, 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 but in reality, what was it really? There were lords and nobles who wanted to steal resources and land. They had to convince people to go fight to do that for them. How are you going to convince people to go fight for you to steal stuff and like you get your share and all your fighters get their share? Well, one of the ways you do it is by getting them into like a unified culture, an ideology, a religion, for example. And you get these two religions fighting each other. Now, maybe it was only one of the sides who instigated the conflict and the other side was kind of doing the defense. I don't know all the ins and outs. It could have been both sides being ruled by greedy, control freak people who just use religion to control the masses and to get them, to be, their cannon fodder or sword fodder, whatever it was at the time. But, that's what it's really all about. Somebody pays for the war. That person wants a return on their investment. That's the history of it. It has always been that. And anybody who's done any kind of serious study about it knows that. What else does it do? So we're going to basically use vast amounts of resources, which would easily bring everybody on the planet out of poverty, easily. It destroys human life. It destroys other animal life, plant life. It destroys beautiful scenery. It destroys, as I said, person killed could be a great artist, great writer, great scientist, great engineer, great doctor, nurse, any other great people, and even if they don't die, they could still be prevented from having that future they might have otherwise have. And there's like a lot of flow-on effects too, because of course for each person who is through death or some other misery prevented from living the life they would have otherwise lived, we not only lose the direct benefit of them doing that, but we lose the indirect, the flow-on benefit, because one thing affects another. And so although that effect diminishes as you travel further away from the source of the benefit, but nonetheless its cumulative total does significantly increase the total value you're looking at of the opportunity lost by that person being gone or no longer doing what they would have otherwise done. Now, it also creates, of course, anger, resentment, cause for vengeance, which flows on for many, many years and potentially, generations, makes a world in which there's less resources to go around, because, of course, you are wasting it on all this stuff. You are destroying, we're not just wasting and destroying resources directly, but you're also destroying society and ecology's capacity to replenish resources, right? So the amount of resources we ever have is constantly changing. And in any snapshot in time, of course, it's a certain amount. But what's important here as well is the ability of society to replenish resources and the ability of nature to replenish resources. Now, if you're also destroying that, then it means not only did you do a lot of harm, but that harm will be repaired at a slower rate because of the damage you did. So these are things that rarely, I think, come into the depth of the calculations that people do when they're looking at the cost of things like warfare. It is vastly higher than what they realize. And this whole notion of, net gain, like people talk about profit, war profiteering. Like, see, I would argue that they don't profit, because profit is supposed to mean net gain. What does net gain mean? It means that you have gained more than was lost. Now, if you cherry pick the things that you are counting as gains, all for you, even if they weren't personally your gains, if you cherry pick the things that are counted as costs for you and you palm off as much as possible as somebody else's loss, and they even have a term for this in economics, it's called externalities. So it's like, oh, that's not my cost, So one way or the other, they palm off the costs to rig the statistics so that it looks like they made a profit. And then not only are they only cherry picking what data they're actually counting and how they're counting it and who they're counting it for, but they're also measuring it in the completely unscientific units of measurement called currency. It doesn't matter which currency you choose, none of them are a scientific unit of measurement of anything at all. And they never have been, not even when the dollar was pegged to gold. That still didn't make it a unit of measurement. And the reason why is this: no matter whether your currency is pegged to some resource or not, here's a fact for you. The exact same transaction between the... Sorry, knocked the big dick again. I'm going to punch this dick. Any transaction for the exact same resources between the exact same two people from 1 second to the next could change in terms of the value of the transaction for those exact same goods, no matter the currency you use, on completely or partially arbitrary basis. This is just how negotiation works. It's like somebody could perceive like an emotional weakness in you and they could exploit that and make you feel uncomfortable, and all of a sudden you accept less money. Nothing changed about the nature of the transaction otherwise, but they just made you feel insecure, right? The length of a meter doesn't change according to how you feel about it. The luminosity of a candle doesn't change because of how you feel about it. The weight of a certain amount of stuff under a certain amount of gravity doesn't change because of how you feel about it, right? Currency is not a valid scientific unit of measurement, and it never can be. So what you're doing is you're cherry picking your data and then measuring it by a false unit. So when we talk about profit in this sense, it is easy to disguise what is really a loss. And if you think about warfare, how could warfare be anything but a loss? And I think this is probably a good point to finish it on, actually. I like that. I did have other things that I did want to discuss, but I think that's kind of poignant. I'll just say it again for effect. It's like, how could you have a profit from warfare? Yeah, that sounds good. I don't know. I think I probably said it better the first time. I was trying too hard then. Anyway, much love for you all from the caffeinated Tyromancer who still hasn't gotten down to the bottle shop yet, but I will do that. Still talking into a dick? Please give generously so that I can stop talking into a dick and get more equipment and actually set this up properly. Thank you very much.